Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer Fantasy lore. Where after last month's video where we looked at the colleges of magic, I figured we would stay in the realms of magic, but have a look at a very, very different sort of magic. Namely, gut magic. For it is about as far removed from anything that goes on within the colleges as it's pretty much possible to get it. Being practiced exclusively by a group of ogre shamans far to the east in the mountains of Morn, it bears very little, if indeed any, resemblance to the near scientific approach to magic that we see in the Empire. And indeed, the ogres would claim that their magic is not magic at all. Just like the priests of Sigmar and Ulrich, they would steadfastly claim that their powers come from their god, the Great Moor, rather than any unclean, unholy source such as magics. Of course, Teclix would once again have a little bit of a laugh about all of this, but the ogres have a better claim than most to the idea that their powers come directly from their gods. Because while Sigmar was once alive, and Ulrich may possibly at some point have been a real entity, the ogres are absolutely sure of the existence of their god, because their god almost wiped them out. Yes, indeed. The Great Moor is no mere fiction of the collective ogre imagination. No ephemeral deity this, oh no. The Great Moor is quite literally a ginormous hole in the ground east of the mountains of Morn, so wide that you cannot even see the other side. A seemingly bottomless pit filled with monstrous teeth that keep going down and down and down into the earth beyond the range of vision. Who would not come to worship such a creature if they came to lay eyes upon it? Especially after its dramatic arrival, falling literally from the sky like a burning meteorite, wiped out most of your civilization in but a single night. If it is true that a good deity needs to be feared, then the Great Moor might just be one of the best deities out there. And his prophets, aptly named Butchers, are no less horrifying. For you see, with the arrival of the Great Moor came not only the annihilation of most of the ogre species, but also a curse placed upon them. Every ogre is, at any point during the waking hours, plagued by a constant gnawing hunger. This is even more so prevalent in the prophets of the Great Moor, the Butchers. A irresistible urge to devour anything and everything around them. And when I say urge, I literally do mean it in the most addictive and pathological sense. An ogre might eat tree bark, or devour his favorite pet gnobler for no other reason than because the urges told him to. And whilst it is certainly true also that the ogres most definitively had a penchant for man-flesh even before the coming of the Great Moor, its arrival has enhanced those urges by quite a bit. And so you can see why the ogre butchers are so thoroughly convinced that their magic stems from their god, since he is such a permanent and inescapable part of their very existence. They view the casting of gut magic and the acquiring of sacrifices to be tossed into bloody moor pits to feed the unsatiable hunger of the moor as the purest form of dedication. So let's talk about some of this magic, shall we? And if you are a gentle sort, well, you're about to get over it or get really sick really quick. Let us start with Troll Guts, because it is a rather useful spell. In fact, it is perhaps one of the most powerful spells within a butcher's arsenal, because if it is successfully cast, it will give an entire unit of ogres regeneration. And what, honestly, better than a massive wall of monstrously powerful flesh storming down towards you, wielding meter-long implements of rusted metal, than that exact same thing, except now with the ability to simply just regrow limbs. So how is this beautiful spell cast? Does it have some kind of incantations? Does it require a meditative trance? What winds of magic does this draw upon? None of the above. All it requires is a focus. Like most forms of gut magic, also known as Gastromancy, that focus is of the edible variant. In the case of troll guts, it is, as the name quite clearly suggests, the literal innards of a freshly slain troll. Yes, indeed. To any other creature, eating any amount of troll flesh would almost certainly result in an extremely drawn-out and excruciating death. First and foremost, troll flesh is extraordinarily toxic, as in, it would literally eat its way out through your stomach lining if you were to try and eat it. And secondly, trolls possess unbelievable regenerative abilities, and even just sliced off portions of troll flesh are often more than capable of regenerating wildly out of control. Which means if you ate a troll flesh steak, there is every chance that once it sits nestling quietly in your stomach, it will start to expand and grow and grow and grow, even as your stomach acid attempts to devour it, until eventually the ever steadily expanding goblet of flesh inside of you simply bursts forth. An exceptionally messy and uncomfortable death, even by Warhammer or 40k standards. And make no mistake, the Butcher is not immune to these effects either. It is just that the physique of an ogre is so tough, so hostile in and of itself, that it might just be able to fight down the troll flesh's own toxicity and its regenerative properties for long enough for the magic regenerating effects of troll guts to kick in. At which point, it is simply a fight between the ogre's insides and the troll flesh to see which one capitulates first. It will be one hell of a stomach cramp, but in return, again, regenerating ogres, that ain't nothing to sniff at. Another personal favorite of mine is positively tame by comparison, Bone Cruncher, where the butcher shovels a huge load of ribs, skulls, and femurs into his mouth and starts crunching and cracking them within his gullet. And as the bones splinter and fracture, the bones of nearby enemy soldiers will also start making loud and very unhealthy popping and snapping noises. Other spell examples would be such things as Brain Gobbler, in which the butcher almost daintily devours the brain of a previous victim, supping the gooey grey mass, often from the shattered cranium of its previous, owner, I suppose? Or what about Spine Marrow, which sees the butcher hold up the spinal column of another slain foe and devouring the marrow from within, no doubt crunching through the bone as well to get at the really juicy bits. Or the heights of Gastromancy, the greatest of all gut spells, known only as the Maw. This spell requires the butcher to devour the carcass of a great beast, and I really do mean the carcass of it. Only by devouring huge portions of a massive monstrous creature, at the very least the size of a fully grown rhino, can this spell be manifested. It causes a great big gap in the earth to open up, revealing a huge toothed maw that quickly and mercilessly swallows anything and everything so unfortunate as to be located above it. Essentially, a mobile sarlacc pit to dispose of those enemies that you feel a particularly heightened level of distaste towards via prolonged and agonizing death, but also only those enemies patient enough to allow you to devour a full-sized meal large enough to kill half a dozen regular men if they were forced to imbibe it. Some say, after all, that revenge is best served cold, and after having been forced to eat your way through half a rhino's worth of meat, well, the other portion is almost certainly going to be cold, and your revenge, well, it too is undoubtedly going to be quite filling. But now, the more steely-eyed amongst you have probably detected the emergence of a subtle yet still perhaps somewhat overstated pattern in all of this. The various spells that the butcher can perform all revolve around the literal eating of some sort of focal item, be it the marrow of a great beast, be it troll guts, be it literal rocks, in the case of the tooth cracker spell. And via this action, the butcher can call forth the blessings of the Great Maw. This has some logistical issues, however. As you probably have already suspected with the Maw spell, bringing along the carcass of a beast the size of a rhino is not necessarily an easy feat. This is of course an ogre, so he's a hell of a lot stronger than any human, but nevertheless, just bringing along that kind of a hunking pile of flesh presents some difficulties, not only in carrying it, but also ensuring that it doesn't all just rot away. Now, of course, any true butcher connoisseur is not opposed to devouring the odd piece of rotted meat, absolutely, but there are certain quantity requirements inherent with the Maw spell. Other ingredients like, well, granite rocks, well, that's a bit easier to get a hold of, assuming you're near a quarry or some kind of a mountain, which, if you're wandering through the mountains of Morn, that's probably not all that far away. Brains, again, if you are a somewhat prolific butcher, the acquiring of the occasional severed head here and there is also probably not all that difficult. Troll guts, well, that probably is going to require you to go a little bit out of your way, because trolls are not overly helpful or friendly creatures, and even if they could probably theoretically survive the removal of their insides, at least half of the time, or perhaps that's a little bit optimistic, but you get the point. They are probably not going to be overly cooperative when a butcher comes around with a large bowl and a cleaver, asking to borrow a little bit of innards here and there. Which means you're gonna have to actually hunt the little bastards down, and then transport the ingredients. Many butchers maintain large coteries of gnoblars who follow them around, driving carts or crudely created refrigerators, smoking chambers, and stuff like this to allow for the treatment and therefore long-term maintaining of some of the more esoterical ingredients of the butcher's arts. Some butchers even become so famous as to have their own little mini warbands within the various ogre kingdoms' tribes. Groups of ogres given over to the study of gastromancy, apprentices essentially, who take care of the butcher's various culinary needs. Extremely successful butchers, those who have garnered themselves a vast following and have proven themselves repeatedly in battle after battle, may even have built up a large enough horde to engage the services of an ogre hunter. These individuals are usually found only in the employ of particularly large or affluent ogre tribes, or as recluses, living high up into the mountains of Morn, where they hunt the biggest and most dangerous of all game. They are not the easiest of individuals to get along with, but their services can absolutely be invaluable, since the Great Moor will require bigger and better sacrifices for the more extreme long-term rituals. Some butchers may even go so far as to establish their own temples of a sort. They will create vast, preferably underground spaces where they can keep huge quantities of butchered and prepared meats of all types, along with the still kicking versions of a lot of the meat. After all, it's a hell of a lot easier to keep the meat fresh and potent if the owner is still alive. This means that the temple is as much massive prison camp as it is a religious altar. But at the heart of each one of these butcherers' temples, fane is perhaps a more accurate term in reality, considering the heart of the temple is the cauldron. A absolutely massive cast iron cauldron, into which the butcher throws all of the various ingredients favored by his god. Meat in various states of rot and decay, and choice pieces of flesh, and accessories of once living beings, eyes, noses, wings, and of course copious quantities of blood. No self-respecting butcher would ever make a soup using such base ingredients as water, after all. And speaking of soups or other forms of foodstuffs, the cauldrons are also quite often used to prepare massive feasts held by the various ogre kings and the nobility, quote-unquote, of the ogre kingdoms, where the butcher takes prime stage in the religious rites for the Great Moor. Often this will also include the construction of a Moor pit, essentially a gladiatorial arena in which ogres will fight other ogres and occasionally less lucky individuals of the various other races will also be tossed in there to compete with one another or various beasts. Additionally, raw pieces of meat will also be flung into the pit, creating, quite literally, a charnel house of blood and gore. This is considered to be an offering to the Great Moor, and is one of very few occasions in which ogres will actually toss away otherwise perfectly fine food. This also gives you a rather neat glimpse into just how much the ogres both fear and respect the Great Moor. For an ogre to willingly give up any amount of food that might otherwise go in his own belly, especially in a society where the size of one's gut is of paramount importance to one's social status, yeah, that'll only ever be done if the creature being offered the food is a more pressing threat to the ogre's well-being, even than the growing of his own guts. And again, considering the mere arrival of the Great Moor wiped out most of the ogres, it probably is a deity worthy of this level of respect and obeisance. Hell, there are even those ogres who claim that there is a second Great Moor on the other side of the planet, theorizing that their hungry hippo of a deity has gnawed its way through the entire world to emerge on the other side. This may of course be a mere flight of fancy, but, again, considering the nature of the Great Moor, perhaps not. Perhaps, indeed, we should all be very, very grateful to the Ogre Butchers for their continued worship of the Great Moor, as their reputed and enthusiastic sacrifices may just slake one tiny little infinitesimally small portion of the Great Moor's ever-knowing hunger, therefore keeping the rest of the world safe from its none too gentle and ravenous attentions. Who knows? Maybe this particular form of religious sacrifice is good for all of us. Good for all of us. Maybe we should also take a moment to curse whoever called this ravenous deity down upon the earth. Looks suspiciously over at Fantasy China, but that'll be a topic for another time. For now, I'm going to wrap up this video on gut magic and also, a little bit incidentally, on butchers and the Great Moor. Until next time, thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon with yet more Warhammer and 40k lore. Until then, have a good day.